we're focused on the ways in which big technology impacts young people. And so what that looks like is their design practices, right, or their conscious decisions that they make to make their platforms in a way that feel addictive to us. And they kind of use our psychology against us, right? So things like, really colorful lights, like a never-ending algorithm, right? Things that young people want. When we're searching for a connection online through these social media platforms, we want to find each other, right? We want to connect with each other by implementing these design practices. They want us to spend more time on the platform and kind of use ourselves against us. And so that's kind of at the core. When we talk about holding big tech accountable, we need to first talk about accountable for what, which is the ways in which they're harming young people. What that actually looks like is making demands of big tech to be better. And we're not anti-technology, we're not anti-social media. We are pro-technology, doing the responsible thing and designing for and with young people. So that looks like different policies, right? Both from the government, but also asking technology companies to change their internal policies too. That looks like young people demanding change, whether that's rallies, content creation, advocacy. So we have a few different avenues, but when we talk about holding big tech accountable, it's really important to actually name what they're doing to us as we kind of go into it.
Yeah, I think Ariel hit on so much of what is the core and the ethos of Design It For Us. Design It For Us started in March of 2023, and so today I feel like there's more young people who are in this conversation who are talking about this, or at least just conscious of this as an issue and thinking about like how it impacts their lives. Only a couple of years ago, like from our perspective, there were very few young people who were talking about this. And that was what spurred us to create Design It For Us, to bring together this group of young people who cared about creating a digital ecosystem that worked for us and using our lived experiences to advocate for policies that we believed would make digital ecosystems better and safer for us. And so to me, it was really interesting, like the trajectory over the past couple of years of young people feeling like they have more agency to at least talk about this as an issue. And Design It For Us started as this handful of young people who like got together on a Zoom call in March of that year and has quickly evolved into an organization that's almost 300 young people from around the world. We're in 36 different states and 17 different countries. And the power that many of the advocates bring is from their own lived experience, from their own unique perspective. Some of these young people are working to become experts or are experts in policy. Some are content creators, some are traditional advocates and activists. And so that's the kind of community that we're bringing together, and I think has really highlighted why young people care about this issue so much from all these different vantage points.
For the young people who might say, I know technology is hurting me or whatever, but I don't really see it. I don't really get why this is relevant to my life or how it's affecting me. What do you say to those people?
I think I've always thought about this as if you have ever experienced a moment or a day where social media, something that you saw on social media or the design of an algorithm or a platform made you feel worse about yourself, that is social media by design impacting your life. And I think what we try and impart on people is like, it doesn't have to be that way. We have accepted this status quo largely because the social media companies have socialized this notion that they are the the gods of Silicon Valley that will deploy these algorithms and these platforms onto us. But in reality, I think what we are trying to get young people to think about is what does a different ecosystem or different social media platforms look like for you? And that looks like kind of distorting the notion or creating a different idea of what the status quo looks like. A status quo where we have more agency over our digital experience. So I think part of it is that we've grown up on these platforms, and so we've come to take whatever they give us at face value. And that can include posts that make you feel worse about yourself, DMs that are sending you unsolicited things. It can include just that sort of feeling of addiction of having to go back even when you don't want to be. And it doesn't have to be that way.
I think to add on what Zaman said about, kind of these like people in Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley motto is move fast and break things. And I think as young people start to reckon with large institutions that play really significant roles in our lives, we should be looking to the institution of Silicon Valley too as a really concerning one that has really deep roots in our life and in part of our struggles, right? Young people sometimes enjoy social media, right? We find community, we do advocacy, we, connect with each other. That's all fine and good. But when we look at larger institutions that are kind of like playing roles in our lives, we are the things that they're breaking, right? We are the things when they say move fast and break things, that's us that they're talking about. So again, right, we can have this community, but also, young people should have the autonomy to kind of make these decisions for ourselves.
What are some of the specific policies that you guys are advocating for? And I guess a part two to that is, do you find yourself going down the route of kind of policy change or advocating to and communicating with big tech, I guess? Like, who are you, when you're making these changes or thinking about making these changes, who are you actually going to be working with and targeting?
So Ariel kind of kicked us off at the beginning around this idea of safety and privacy by design. It's this notion that if you impose policies or laws on the way that a social media company designs an algorithm or designs a product, you are creating or can create a safer experience for young people, a more productive experience for young people without regulating the content that's on these platforms. And, platforms are governed by and have liability from the content that appears on their platforms under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And so a lot of the policies that we advocate for is around making sure that we are targeting specifically design-focused legislation and policies. Your question, like around big tech, is interesting because these companies, from our perspective, have really abdicated a lot of their responsibility in both being stewards of social good and communicating with civil society in a way that is productive. And, I think about the companies that are kind of at the top of the chain, Meta, Google, these companies that are so large that they seemingly like have a mandate to not care about their users anymore. And I think it's unfortunate that these companies have lost the ability to communicate with civil society that ultimately wants them to be something better, something that would probably do well for their consumers and their users. And so, I don't see it as productive to engage with companies who are unwilling to put people over profits. Having said that, I think that there are a number of budding companies in this space who do want to do social good, who do want to do right by their consumers. And so I really see it as our role is to empower those companies to adopt a lot of the frameworks that we're thinking about design and policies through and think about building a product that really is about giving young people agency and creating a digital experience that is worthwhile, that is meaningful, that like wants you to keep coming back because you feel good about yourself or you feel good about your interactions on the platform. And that is a lofty goal. Like, I don't think we're anywhere near that right now, but I think we have to imagine what these realities, these potential future realities look like in order for us to advocate for the things that are going to get us in that direction.
And looking at Meta specifically, I know you guys did a recent study of their, teen safety protections. I don't know if you guys want to kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah, so Accountable Tech and Design It For Us work together to have 5 Gen Z researchers from Design It For Us uh, basically create teen accounts on Instagram to test this new product. So Instagram rolled out teen accounts in September of last year ahead of a hearing around the Kids Online Safety Act, and essentially we viewed it as, more PR, as they're just trying to roll out this product to appease lawmakers and appease the regulatory scrutiny that they were under. So Meta built this experience that they believed or that they said was going to be safer for young people. Over the course of 2 weeks, our researchers uh, created teen accounts, pretended to be teenagers, and basically created a profile for themselves, mimicking what an average teenager would do on the platform and the kinds of interests that they would have. And we asked our participants who were age 18 to 22, so pretty close to like the teenage years, to use Instagram as they would, a kind of standard procedure, like, scrolling through content. And we asked them to flag things that they saw that they deemed disturbing, harmful, or obscene. And the amount of sexualized content and body image and eating disorder content that these participants saw, I mean, 5 out of 5 accounts were recommended sexualized content. 4 out of 5 were recommended body image and eating disorder content. And, almost all our participants described having some kind of emotional distressing experience while using teen accounts. So to us, it was a clear indication that the product isn't working for our participants and likely is not going to be working um, for other teenagers, because these are the accounts that people are supposedly being dropped into. And it really just gets at that notion of like, these companies, when we test these features, don't actually want to do good by their users. They're just trying to appease like the scrutiny that they're under. And so, I would encourage the company to like take a good hard look at the research that we have, and it vastly needs to improve the product that they're rolling out right now.
And the study you guys did is very interesting. There's a great Washington Post article about it that I would encourage people to check out. But I think that kind of, negative or sexual content is just one piece of the puzzle. And I would love to hear more about your perspective on addictive algorithms and how that sends young people into either, extremist pipelines or just generally kind of misinformed, dark views of the world, getting constant, content about crime and different racial groups and just crazy stuff. And so I think for me, I spent a lot of time thinking about and worrying about addictive algorithms, and how they're kind of rewiring our brains effectively as well. So I would love to hear your takes on that. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll start here, and I'll pass it off to Zaman. So the algorithm, right? We talk about this like it's like amalgamous thing, and it kind of is, right? There's not a lot of transparency of what it truly is, but the algorithm is an AI model that tries to recommend videos to users based on what it thinks they'll spend time watching, not what they think they'll enjoy or find value in, but what they'll spend time watching. And so a video that has, let's say, a depiction of graphic violence, has, right, like a high amount of shock value. It's more likely to be shared, commented on, talked about because of this high emotional impact. The algorithm doesn't focus on whether or not that's good for people. It just says, okay, this is something that's making people spend a lot of time on the app. I'm going to push it out more. The goal for these companies is to have us spend as much time as possible on their platforms. And so videos, regardless of their content, that keep you on the platform for longer is their goal. So that's why I kind of at the root of this addictive algorithm, where we see some of this content continuously getting to our young people. So when there's, one form of graphic content that's shown, right? It's circulated, people are talking about it, there are comments, it boosts it in the algorithm. It'll find more videos like that and continue to show it to a user. Everyone's algorithm looks very different, right? So my algorithm is going to look different than yours, Lily, because we have different interests, but also the algorithm has determined that different things will make us spend longer on time on the platform. So when it does this, right, it's pushing the most obscene content. And that's how we see, right, some young people fall into these rabbit holes, whether it's the alt-right pipeline or other graphic depictions, where it's continuously being served really harmful content. So that's kind of the process, the way that I see it.
Lily, have you watched Adolescence on Netflix?
I have not yet. I've seen all of the like takedowns of it, or not takedowns, but the discourse about it. But I want to watch it. I imagine a lot of people who are listening to this probably have.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting lens into like the discussion around young men and the manosphere right now. And, I think that was a big discussion in the 2024 election of like, where is the political views of young men and kind of how have young men been lost to some of these algorithms, honestly, like the content that some people are being fed from these influencers that purport a certain worldview that is pretty deeply disturbing is part of that that notion that Ariel is describing, that like an algorithm has identified this content as being engaging to young men or to a subset of boys, and it keeps pulling them back or pulling them back in. And I won't spoil the whole show around adolescence, but it's really interesting. Like they use the lens of this young boy Jamie in the UK to essentially like analyze the crime he's accused of committing, and by the end you're kind of like reflecting on how did what he saw or interact around social media like create perceptions of how he viewed other young people in his community, other women, how his views were created on his women peers in his classroom. And I mean, I think that is like the real world harms, to come back to your earlier question about like we're all kind of experiencing the the different defects with these kinds of products. So, this is something that is particularly concerning to me. I think is particularly concerning to a lot of people, both in the context of like our politics, but also like the mental health of these young people, and like how are we going to be able to disrupt or break that cycle, which seemingly has kind of been very profitable and taken a foot very quickly in the past couple of years.
And do you think that necessary conversations about the dangers of social media and addictive algorithms kind of got overwhelmed or replaced by conversations about censorship, or do you think that that is a separate and also very valid issue? Because in my experience, I feel like a lot of the last 10 years with like the banning Joe Rogan from the internet, whatever, what should have been a consensus issue became very politicized, because censorship is really tricky, and whoever's in power, whoever's running the social media company, whatever, gets to decide who's getting censored. And so I would be very curious to hear your thoughts on both. Are those two things mutually exclusive? how do we think about censorship? How do we think about it in the context of regulating social media and kind of what you guys are working on right now?
Yeah. I think we can talk about digital censorship while also talking about the design features of technology. They're not mutually exclusive. I have seen censorship kind of become the straw man that's propped up by big technology in order to avoid taking responsibility for their design products. Asking for a safe product isn't censorship. Um, it's like any other product that exists in the world, right? It has to be made for their users, has to be safe to use. People can use it in the ways that they wish. But I think one of the things that's been frustrating for me in this space is that these companies, can kind of just go back to censorship whenever we ask them to make really simple, really responsible and ethical design choices that are common sense.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ariel. I think, and this is part of a reflection that I've been thinking about for a little while around the broader responsible tech community, the community of organizations and people who are advocating for safer online platforms. Um, I don't know at what point like the the sort of liberal left seem to have ceded the arguments around censorship to the conservative right. And it's been really fascinating to like see this unfold because, in my mind, the idea of a government imposing content restrictions in a way that prevents like protected speech from being able to be uh, spoken online, and companies that are using their influence as these massive um, monopolies on expression and ideas, cracking down on the ability for people to say certain things, regardless actually of the political view. Like we see and hear these accusations on the right and the left, whether it's, you know, pro-abortion content or pro-gun content. Like the accusations have kind of come from all the sides. And so, you know, to me, like I do worry about a broader problem, which gets at your question, which is like we have ceded so much power to these companies to make decisions about the kind of content that we see that it should probably concern all of us, regardless of your partisan lean. And and the and now that there are advocates in government who are willing to advocate for certain kinds of speech being restricted online, like that to me is part of this broader problem of the power that we've allowed tech companies to have. And so I think this is where like to try and be solution oriented around this conversation. This is where like competition policy and antitrust have really become bipartisan levers that both sides care about. And it is like to get to the name of this podcast, it is a populist belief, I think, that a lot of people have that large corporations that are able to dominate discussion in this way should probably be regulated. The kind of like effects of censorship are downstream from the power that these companies have amassed. And so, the DOJ, for example, across multiple administrations taking on Google, the FTC taking on Meta right now. The same goes for Amazon. Like, hopefully, we're going to get to a place where we can quell some of the power and oftentimes illegal power these companies have accumulated and their ability to essentially enforce their worldview or decide their worldview for everyone, regardless of the impacts to the people who are using the products.
This is kind of an odd question, but if you had to choose between a world in which addictive algorithms and some of these kind of negative effects of technology or negative aspects of this technology are not accessible to young people, and then everyone over 18 or 21 has kind of a free-for-all on the internet, kind of in the same way you might think of like big tobacco, right? Like you're not allowed to do that to kids, you're not allowed to sell it to kids, but adults, if they're consenting, they can ruin their lives in whatever way they want. Do you see a world in which, would you choose that over a more kind of like moderate regulation on all of big tech? I don't know. Just that's something I've been thinking about is like, you know, is this something that we try to prevent young people from feeling the effects of, but we let adults do whatever they want? Or is it something that across the board you think we all should be experiencing the same kind of regulations and protections?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's kind of like the idea of like to sort of distill out something from your question that like when our parents say, like, why are you always on your phone? Like you're always on your social media. And then they are like as addicted as we are. It's sort of this same continuum of the problem. Um, so I mean, I think it's really interesting because so the law going back to 1998 developed this pretty arbitrary age that 13 was the youngest age that you could be on social media. Um, and there's different research out there now kind of contesting that age of 13. Um, but like with a lot of these online safety protections or privacy protections that we've been advocating for, like the downstream potential unintended consequences, kind of what you're alluding to is like when you turn 18, it's like, okay, guardrails are off, like, you're kind of at the thrown to the wolves. I mean, I believe that we should be able to advocate for increased protections for young people while also building in things like comprehensive privacy for everyone. I mean, that is a right that everyone should be able to have regardless of your age. It's the same, I think, goes for competition, is like we deserve companies that have to compete for our attention, for the market share, and that those benefits are downstream to everyone. So I take the view that we should absolutely be creating safer experiences for young people, but that doesn't mean that we can neglect adults or everyone else.
And then I guess, if we're, I mean, there's so many different things, and you guys have your Declaration of Digital Rights. You guys talk about AI policy. There are so many different things. Is there one kind of program or one thing you're focused on with Design It For Us that you'd really like to highlight or you're really excited about?
I can kind of hop in. So, just for some background, so the Declaration of Digital Rights is this document that we created after going on a campus tour in the fall of 2024. And what we noticed is that there are young people who are passionate, who want to be talking about these issues, and we really wanted to connect with them. And so we did some research on 5 different U.S. college campuses, having conversations, hosting panels about what young people's experiences online are. With that research, we collated it with our coalition, and we produced a report called the Declaration of Digital Rights, right? Or things that we as young people hold to be inalienable, and kind of a stronghold, for our rights in this area. One of the things that I'm really excited for as I kind of look towards the future of Design It For Us, we have these things called leadership groups. And what we did is we've kind of narrowed our core organizing work to a few different buckets, right? Think like antitrust policy, AI policy, and we appointed leaders in our coalition to do work, right? So now every week we host you know, we do programs on AI policy, we do antitrust, in addition to our larger coalition calls. And I think kind of like doubling down on creating spaces for young people to just talk about this, creating opportunities for young people to make content, give an interview, hold a rally, is really, really exciting. And so, to anyone listening who might be interested in getting involved, those are really awesome opportunities to kind of like, start up, talk about these things with your peers. One of the strongest things about our coalition is that we're a community space, right? We're a platform for young people to talk about these issues with ourselves and with each other. And that's really meaningful in a time and kind of in our digital ecosystem where a lot of these conversations are already happening on these platforms. To kind of reclaim and make our own space is really valuable.
I mean, I can jump in with something that is maybe a little less as rosy. I think I love all the work that we do at Design It For Us. Part of it is also pushing back against the bad things that we see. And so right now, the House of Representatives in their reconciliation package is proposing a 10-year ban on states' ability to regulate AI. And it would be the biggest gift to tech companies, essentially a decade of getting off scot-free from any legislation that all 50 states choose to try and impose to protect their citizens, their community, because the federal government hasn't acted. And so we know that, this is likely to maybe fail under Senate process rules, but it's going to come back up again, and that we need to be clear about not only why we believe states should have the ability to impose protections for young people on social media and AI, but also that we should be sending a message to the federal government that no, it's not okay that you stop states from acting when you have failed to act. And I think it's fascinating that the same people who advocate for states' rights are willing to restrict the ability for states to act in this way. I mean, we've done tremendous work at the state level around advocating for age-appropriate design codes, and I really value the work that those state lawmakers do, the work that they put in to get that legislation absolutely right, because they're stepping up where Congress has failed. So if you want to get involved in that kind of work, we're doing a call to action and what our colleague has deemed power hours, to get people in rooms together to pick up the phone and call your elected officials to tell them to vote no, or to stop this proposal from happening.
When you think about, the like our children's, their grandchildren's generation, obviously there's so much unknown about where technology is going to go, but do you have any hopes about kind of the technology that you'd like to see them using, or the way that you'd like to see them live their lives in the absence of addictive algorithms? That's something I think is a stressor. Like we've this generation has dealt with some crap and has really, I think, negatively been influenced by big tech. And I'd like to hope it'll look different in the future, but I don't know. So I don't know if you kind of have your long-term plan or idea of what a better childhood in the future for Americans would look like.
That's a really great question because I think it asks us to do something that's really important in advocacy, which is think about the future that we want rather than the present that we don't want. Um, when I think about, our digital future, I'm envisioning a world where young people can use the internet to connect with each other, to find new interests, to see new things, share new things, who are inherently protected, right? Who are not seeing harmful content that's going to damage their well-being, who are not contacted by strangers. And this sounds really basic, right? But these are really important things. I'm envisioning a future in which technology companies uphold their responsibility kind of as a public good, and know that their impact on the lives of young people is essential, and to take that responsibility really seriously. I also envision a future where innovation is not just reserved for the few people in Silicon Valley who can get a few $1 million in startup funding, but innovation's open to everyone. I also see a future where young people have a lot of choice online. I hope that there are physical environments in our world too that are upholding and safe enough and valued enough for young people to feel like they can also go outside and play, or they can, do things online. But having some of that choice is really essential. I think asking where technology is going to be in, 20, 30 years is a really hard question to answer. I don't even think we know where technology is going to be in 20 months. So it's hard to do that. But what I can say is that the evergreen way that we think about technology and ethics should be upheld in the future, right? That technology is a tool for people to make our lives better, not worse, and certainly not to make companies money. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I second all of that. And, the mediums that the next generation or the generation following are going to be using around media, I mean, we can probably only dream of, imagine of right now, just the scale in which technology has grown. And so I think from my perspective, it's like, how can we create and instill principles that last beyond a certain kind of technology, that, principles that our Declaration of Digital Rights, for example, points to around transparency, safety, agency, that withstand the test of time of technological growth, that, you know, marketing, for example, and media is always going to try and reach young people. It's like the most kind of attractive market to create ideas, to sell products to. So as technology begins to, or already continues to grow, how can we make sure that those principles remain? And so I really like hope for a world where young people not only have agency over their digital experiences, but know how to use that agency to create a system that works for them, that is something that allows them the kind of distance that they need to connect with the physical world still, but also maximize the kind of digital experience that they have. Um, and like we're kind of seeing it now, like the medium of news, for example, is being disseminated more like through this kind of form, like through podcast form. And so I think as media changes as well, it's going to be ever more important that we create experiences for like diverse sets of voices to be contributing and using their platforms to be able to do that. I guess, Lily, I'd throw the question back at you as somebody who's like doing new kinds of media in this way. Like, what is kind of the lens that you see or the perspective that you want to see in like young people interacting in these kinds of spaces?
Great question. I mean, I think right now, for me, I want young people to see that a lot of the general kind of frustration, angst, loneliness, lack of purpose, lack of community, all these things that I think big tech is either exacerbating or directly contributing to. I want them to be able to name that, you know, name the source of their frustration and be able to say it's Meta or it's this company or it's this, lack of regulation. I think that's one of the things that I find frustrating now is we're often kind of naming the wrong enemies, and we're targeting each other rather than these big corporations. And so I think just the first thing I want to see is a world in which when people feel like they are, again, increasingly lonely, angry online, whatever, they're able to say, oh, it's not because I'm being, or it's not because, I don't know, because you'll see some really dark stuff pushed on the internet, and part of it is, helping people misrepresenting certain groups of people, I think, is a big issue I have, and I'm doing a terrible job articulating myself. But a lot of this like kind of racist, crazy stuff I see on the internet, it's like Meta is sending this to your phone. Like Meta wants you to be angry at this group of people. It's not really in line with the actual stats of like how this, group of people being here affects you. It just frustrates me so much. So I think it's being able to name the enemy is an important kind of next step. It's a long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, I think that's huge. And I think that you really hit the nail on the head, right? In saying that there are companies that profit from our rage, from our outrage, but also from divisiveness, right? The more that we're divided, the more we're going to spend time online, the more we're going to spend time in our own echo chambers. And that's really concerning.
And the thing that I always think about is like we have an algorithm that feeds us content, but then there's also an algorithm now that sorts the comments that you see under a post. And like the comments that you're going to see and that I'm going to see are going to be different. Maybe the first two are like the most liked comment, but everything else is designed to. I had this conversation the other day with somebody where it's like y- people go to the comments to decide like how they want to feel about a certain kind of content that they saw. And you and I could have very different takeaways having read a comment section. And when you're doing that in like a split second, you're scrolling through for like 3 seconds on a post and you're going on to the next thing. You've created all this judgment and perspective about a person, a group of people, an idea that you have no additional context for. And, Lily, to your point, like those when that kind of technology or that kind of design is able to be weaponized in a way against certain groups of people, like I think that's where we see it the most kind of contributing factors to a lot of the problems that we're experiencing today.
That's such a good point on the comment section because it's so true. And we as humans, right, we make decisions of what we feel based on the people around us, right? And so if something, we think is socially acceptable because of a few comments that have been bumped up in the algorithm, we're going to start to go down particular pipelines, right? Because we say, oh, this is socially acceptable. I just read a few comments around it, and we create this whole world that only exist on our phones and in our own minds. And they're completely different from the person next to us. And that is really concerning, right? Like to your question earlier, like talking about, the manosphere and like these really particular things. The fact that that even exists is wild to me, right? That like there are these like kind of sectors of the internet that choose to be siloed. So it's really really difficult. And I appreciate this because I really do think it's far time that these companies take a little bit of responsibility for the role that they're playing in our society.
Ariel, we should do this experiment, I think, where we like take a focus group that looks at a piece of content and the same another group looks at content. One sees the comment section, the other doesn't, and like what is their decision
Oh
around
my
how they
gosh,
feel about that?
yes. Oh, that would be so interesting. Well, yeah, because I mean, with every piece of content, like the comments, but like also just like these other metrics, right? Like I'll think differently about a piece of content if it has like one like versus like 10,000 likes or like, And so it's that would be a really interesting experiment.
I think making more people aware of the ways that the algorithm affects the comment section is really important because I don't think I even fully understand or recognize that the comments are being influenced by the algorithm as well. So that's a very important and interesting thing. It gets back to like the whole naming the enemy thing. Yeah, no, it's crazy stuff. I don't know if it was Giannis Varoufakis who said this. It's like a hallucination of the world is basically what the internet is, and it's crazy stuff we're dealing with. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing and addressing possibly like the most pressing issue of our time. So, and it's only going to get crazier, unfortunately. So you're not going to run out of work to do. It's probably just going to get worse. But I really appreciate you guys being here. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us together for this conversation. I have, yeah, a lot of takeaways and a lot of thoughts that uh, have kind of just been bubbling from this. So, yeah, really appreciate this space to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. If you're listening to this and you're like, whoa, these people sound so cool, like I want to do stuff like that, at Design It For Us or designitforus.org are two places that you can come join our coalition. We Anyone can join, it's an open coalition. And you don't have to like be an expert on this stuff, right? Like Zaman and I talk about this all the time, but if you're just interested in learning more about this, I really encourage you, if you're listening, to come along, come check out what we're about.
Awesome. Okay, this is great. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Lily.